And there we go. And then we'll start letting people in because it's 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. We'll just take a few minutes to let everyone gather before we kick off. Morning, everyone. We'll kick off in a few minutes, so you've got time to grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee to see you through the next hour or so. We'll start in a couple of minutes. We'll just start in a couple of minutes from now, so just letting people gather into the meeting room. If you do want to get a drink while we're waiting, please feel free. Morning, all. We'll start in 1 minute. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Gavin Starks. I'm the founder of Icebreaker One, and we're going to be talking about open energy today with a fantastic panel. I'm very excited about this. Just before we start, I'm going to ask that we launch our first poll. We would like to make these sessions very interactive. So our first question is going to be a little bit about who's in our audience today, so that we can get a better understanding of who's here. And throughout this as well, there's also a chat function. We strongly encourage everyone to ask any questions using the group chat wherever possible, and we will try and address those as we go forward. So, excuse me, the speakers today, we've got Helen from Ofgem, Dan Clark from the ENA, Simon Evans from ARPA, Andy Allen from City Science, and Sarah Vaughan from Alexon. Just to give us a bit of framing, the work that we're doing on open energy is to try and make data work harder to deliver net zero. And the seismic change that's happening in the energy sector to modernize our energy infrastructure and modernize our energy data as part of that, we see as a really key component of helping to deliver net zero in the UK. But to move us into that sort of broader context, I'd like to pass over to Helen to give us the perspective from Ofgem.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you, Gavin, for the introduction, and it's great to be here. Just to give a bit of background as to why I am here at Ofgem, why I'm passionate about it, and really looking forward to discussion, is I've been involved over all my career in terms of data and transforming multiple different sectors. You know, I worked in retail and loyalty marketing in the 80s and 90s, working on Clubcard. Gave me a real understanding of consumers' perspective, and that we need to bring that through to what we do all the time. Sort of more recently, I've worked in the London insurance market, and that's about actually how you get complex organisations to change and share critical information that actually helps you move. Now, all of these are really big challenges that we face when we're looking at actually getting the transformation that we need. There's a lot of discussion going to go on today. I'm really looking forward to seeing and hearing the opinions, not from a technical data perspective, but from what we really believe we need to do and act on as the regulator to actually make those changes. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Helen. And Dan?
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here amongst an esteemed panel of colleagues. So yeah, thanks very much for the invite. It's great to be here, and I'm also looking forward to the discussion. I thought I ought to introduce ENA just for anyone who was not familiar with who we are and what we do. So I've put a slide together, Gavin, if we could go to the next slide, just to give people a bit of an overview of what we do. So we represent the gas and electricity networks across the UK and Ireland, and that's both at distribution and at transmission level. That equates to approximately 29 million electricity customers and 21 million gas customers. So essentially, we look to be a support function, a place where networks can come together and collaborate. So in terms of energy data, we have set up a data and digitalization steering group. That's been running for almost 2 years now. And we use that forum to collaborate on whole systems projects involving all gas and electricity members, so all gas and electricity networks across the UK and Ireland. There are some really interesting projects that have come out of that. We've recently run a proof of concept for data triage, looking at how we might service data requests and provide a consistent format for those data requests back to the requester. I'm sure we'll be talking about that as we go through the forum. And that energy data request tool is now a live tool that anybody can use on our website. We also have been putting together a proof of concept for a national energy system map. So again, this will combine data from all networks, gas and electricity across GB mainland, and be a place where people can go and look at data assets, network assets, and start to answer some of their questions from their own perspective. So again, probably something we'll cover in a bit more detail as we go through the presentation. That's it from me. Yeah, looking forward to the discussion as we go through this. I'll pass on to the next speaker.
Super. Thanks very much, Dan. I'll pass on over to Simon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gavin. And yeah, great to be here as well. So as a short introduction to myself, so I look after digital within our energy sectors here at ARPA. And what I mean by that is looking at how we can enhance and enable our design, delivery and operations through any of these internet era technologies, which of course data being a key factor and something that we see our clients struggle with the most. But for those of you who don't know ARPA, so ARPA are an engineering consultancy who've been involved in some of the world's most iconic projects. So we work across the entire built environment, and a huge amount of which is in the energy sector as well. And why this is interesting is we're quite unique that we're employee owned, and which means we're quite purpose driven in what we do. So our mission is to very much shape a better world, which is not just a marketing tagline, it's core to us and how we operate now, where we consider sustainable development as everything. Now, why I link that to this discussion today, of course, is that for us, we see that the transition of the energy sector to net zero is a necessary part of what we need to do as a nation. And we're working very hard in that space, and have been very privileged to be working with Icebreaker actually on a linked energy data visibility project. And we have a huge perspective on how the work going in this space and how opening up energy data overall can really create a marketplace for innovation, and what that can do for catalyzing and growing success around it. But we'll touch on more of that later. But no, really great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks very much, Simon. Now over to Andy. Andy.
Oh, hi, guys. Thanks very much for inviting me, Gavin, and lovely to meet you, fellow panelists. So I work for a company called City Science. So City Science was set up really to build tools and to provide consultancy services to help people decarbonize. And that can be local authorities or in the private sector or commercial sector, for example. So we really see data as being key. So we're mostly a user of data, but also a provider of data in some circumstances. And we see data being key for a number of reasons for decarbonisation. You know, for example, from the local authority side, for coming up with strategy and action plans for implementation, and also for monitoring. So we've been building tools for local authorities, but also for example, for heat decarbonisation, and also for retrofitting homes, and getting a proposal together where you can actually de-risk investment is key for actually getting money into this section, and also proving that you can do decarbonisation at the lowest cost is another key feature. So thanks very much, guys.
Great, thanks, Andy, and straight over to Sarah.
Thanks very much, Gavin, and hello everybody. I'm really pleased to be here today. Just a little bit about me. As you see, I'm a non-executive director at Alexon, which manages one of the industry codes, the Balancing and Settlement Code. I've been working at Icebreaker One as co-chair of the membership advisory group for phase 3, so that's been for about the last 4 months. But until end of January this year, I was on the board of E.ON, one of the larger UK energy companies, where over time I worked for a generator, a supplier, a distribution company, a renewables developer, a large community energy player, and a trading business, but all without changing my employer. So you could say that I've knocked about a bit within the industry. But what that also means is that I've seen huge change happening. And I'm sure, as others have said, that we'll touch on that today. I remember going to a meeting with a colleague with one of the directors general at BEIS, and we were talking about making homes more energy efficient and about how we could do more in this space. And he turned to us and said, how many homes do you think we need to insulate to meet our carbon target? And my colleague and I looked at each other trying to do the maths in our head. And he just simply said, all of them. And I think that's just indicative of the scale of change we need to see. And it doesn't even begin to touch on the EVs, the PV, the heat pumps, the flexibility solutions, the hydrogen, and all the other things we need to deliver. And data is key to all of that. And I think we'll discuss today how electricity data, heat data, buildings data, transport data, integrating data, disaggregating data, and so on. From Alexon's perspective, we've taken a bit of a lead on this. We work closely with the Energy Data Task Force and committed to embed the principles of open data in the BSC. And just last week, following a modification to the code, snappily named P398, that principle formally went live. And that gave Alexon another first in the market, as the first code administrator to formally embed open data within its code. So that in itself is opening the door to supporting the path to net zero by making available data that will help facilitate innovative new ways of reducing carbon. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And I just want to do a bit more scene setting as we kind of kick off here. I think firstly, just to unpack some definitions, we're quite jargon heavy as industries, especially as the data worlds and the energy worlds come together. We're multiplying up on our jargon. So to be clear, what we mean by open data and another phrase which we use called shared data. Open data is data that anyone can use for any purpose for free. So clearly there's a lot of information there that would be appropriate to be sharing at a national scale to help innovation and help bring transparency to the market. But there's a lot of reasons why you can't make everything open, and we call things that can't be open but should be shared, shared data. And the Open Energy initiative here is to provide open access to both categories. So we've got two components of the work that we're doing. One is around an energy data search function, where you'll be able to search for both open data and shared data. You may think this is a solved problem. It really isn't. Do we know what data we've got in the country about what we're doing? Does everybody know what everybody else has? No. So the first order problem is to just sort out, can we discover what data exists within the systems that we have? And the second problem that we're addressing is, can I then access and use it? For open data, obviously that's easy. You just get straight access. For shared data, you need permission. So the Open Energy Initiative creates a permission structure across the network, across the energy sector, to enable participants to know who each other are and share data securely with each other, dealing with all manner of issues ranging from intellectual property to liability and so on. So I just want to give a bit of context there. And the second big shift from the energy side is we've obviously seen vast investment in renewables and microgeneration. And we've got vast shifts towards localized energy storage in buildings, and we're electrifying our transport infrastructure. So a lot of our energy infrastructure will be driving around in the next decade. So we've got lots of really interesting questions and context there. What we're really keen to see here is, what's really going to make a difference. So what I would like to start maybe with, what's the top use case here that can help drive us towards net zero? Sarah, you mentioned, every building. I'd agree. It's every building, it's every business, it's every vehicle. What's your top priority there? What would you pick?
You see, I wouldn't. And that's exactly the point. I don't think there's a single silver bullet here. And you cannot just focus on one area. You have to focus on the different vectors. You have to look at heat. You have to look at transport. You have to look across the piece. And even transport in itself, it's not going to be one solution. You might say that for lorries, for heavier transport, then actually electricity is not going to work for that, whereas it will work very well for the smaller stuff. I think the other issue, Gavin, that I just would draw out, and it comes back to one of Helen's points about thinking about the customer. We've done actually really quite well in decarbonisation in the UK so far, but it's been the electricity generation sector that's done a lot of the heavy lifting through the investment in renewables, and we hope more investment in nuclear going forward. It's gone from about 2.3% to 30% share of renewables on the system between 1990 and 2020. But that is about big companies pulling big levers. And what we're looking at for going forward is going to be, yes, we need more big companies pulling big levers, but we also need a lot more SMEs coming into the market. We need a lot more startups. We need a lot more innovation, but we also need people like you and me to have a realization, and maybe not, maybe we're not the sort of typical people here, but to have a realization of the need that we have to make changes to our own homes, to our own behaviors. So I'm sorry, I really can't fix on one. I think it's a whole spectrum.
It's all of the above. And Andy, from a startup perspective, what do you need to help scale? What do you think we need to help scale the SME community to create impact across the country here? Because I think I would agree with Sarah here that there's no one silver bullet. it really requires everybody's shoulder to this particular challenge. What do SMEs need? I do all the easy questions, as you'll find through the panel.
Yeah. I mean, I think you mean for SMEs to decarbonize, or SMEs
to accelerate the journey? So, is it a question of like we need to fund, like let 1,000 flowers bloom through some more public funding, and Open Energy has come into life through the UKRI Meta program and BASE funding through EDVP. We wouldn't exist without public funding. So there's a role of government here to, I think, help catalyze innovation and then help catalyze scale. And I'll come to Daniel next about how we do the next bit. If Andy and Sarah are going to be trailblazing and saying this is what we need to do, how do we then scale it? But what would move the needle from your point of view, Andy, in terms of really creating that sort of potential to scale?
I think partially that's government funding, and partially that, for us anyway, that is also access to data that we can build tools on, which can help other people decarbonize. And for us, for building tools, I guess that's demonstrating that demonstrating we can do that, and do that to a level at which investor confidence would grow to actually, so it wouldn't just be public funding, it would also be other investors coming and investing in your company. So we need to sort of get to that minimum point where we can actually, so I guess there's a role for government in taking it to a certain point. And then whatever we're building, I guess we need investors to then get on board. So we need a really good value proposition from that point. And part of that comes down to having great data and being able to see, to see how we should build tools, but also where we should focus our efforts, and how investors can actually have the confidence to invest after that point.
No, I think that they're really important points. And I think what a lot of our work at Icebreaker One has been around helping the financial community understand how to de-risk their climate investments, or understand their current risks. There's lots of stranded assets out there right now, or about to be out there right now, and maybe Florida being one of the larger ones. But I wonder if you could help bring to life a little bit when you say, we need more data in order to innovate here. What kinds of data are you talking about? I think one of the reflections we've had through the energy data search development is, where do we draw a boundary? What classifies as energy data, and do we not need everything else as well? So what's the most useful data for you? What would move the needle there?
Yeah, again, another difficult question, actually. Yeah, so
if I can help,
having an approach to more easily gain access to data from different energy networks would be great. I think also, I think this comes down to partly what the Energy Networks Association are doing, also having common standards and interfaces between data sets. I think, again, it comes down to one is data search, definitely. So people actually putting data up there and letting people know what it is, and with having sufficient metadata is great. I can't really answer for one data set here, but I think you're taking a good approach as to understanding what data exists, understanding the format, understanding what standards and linkages between different data sets is key, and then let the innovators get on and build a business case around it.
Great. Absolutely. And you mentioned the ENA there, so let's come to Dan. Dan, what do you see as the opportunities and the challenges in this landscape?
I think to follow up on what Andy said there around standardization, it's a fairly pragmatic answer, which you might expect from networks. But I think the standardization of data is absolutely critical. These are the building blocks on which we can do much more exciting things like flexibility, like open data protocols, etc., etc. So standardization of data is absolutely critical. We have a subgroup under our data and digitalization steering group looking at the common information model, also known as SIM, as a way of harmonizing the data that comes from networks. So that's what we're doing at sort of a more strategic level. And then at a very base level, sort of a bottom-up approach, the energy data request tool will service individual data requests. And the way we've done, the reason we've done that is, as Andy said, it's very hard to put your finger on a single data set and say, well, if you release that data, it will solve all of our problems. So through the energy data request tool, we are gathering a bottom-up approach, looking at the data requests that come in, then servicing and harmonizing the data for that, because right now there is no standardization of that data. So through that process, there will be a standard data set, which will then be released back to the requester. And then if we get lots of data requests in the same area, we can use other tools to publicize that data in other ways. So for example, the National Energy System Map, NESM, that will be a publicly available map that anybody can log into and see network assets. And then depending on your access level, you'll be able to see deeper levels of data. Now, if we get a lot of data requests for a particular data set, we can use that National Energy System Map to publish that up front and then direct any further data requests to that National Energy System Map. So we've got sort of the overarching strategic approach in terms of standardizing data, and then a bottom-up approach to prioritize particular data sets and data requests.
Thanks, Dan. And we've been working a lot on the data standards side. I'll come to Simon next on some of that. But I think one of the key things that we've learned from the development in other areas, such as open banking, is that standardization and interoperability isn't just a technology problem. It's one that requires interventions at the legal level to try and standardize contracts and reduce the friction in contracting and licensing data, but also at a liability level to make sure that everybody knows who's responsible for things when they go wrong, because things will always go wrong even with the best of intent, and at the policy level to make sure that people are compelled to act. Let's come a little bit to the data standard side. Simon, if you want to comment on that, and then I'll come to Helen on some of the broader questions.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with that. The barriers and blockers to this are more than just technical. It's the legal policy culture angle as well. And the work you're talking about there is we're working with Icebreaker at the moment on helping to understand what the metadata landscape might look like to facilitate this, because of course it's great having access to data, but unless you have the metadata that describes what's within the data, it's really hard to really get value from it in the same way. So getting that kind of common consensus on what is the basic information that we should be sharing as industry that allows people to search, allows people to engage with this, I think is absolutely key. But also understanding how we can address at the same time those other blockers and barriers. And why I think that's quite exciting is if we look at the innovation possibilities that really come from this, and Gavin, you mentioned there, open banking, I think is the fantastic parallel, isn't it? That's created a 43 billion pound industry and 400 tech firms over the last couple of years. Like, what will that mean for us in the energy sector, that we create this exchange, this interchange of data, and the marketplace for innovation that's unlocked from it? For us as a consultant, as ARPA, of course, we're looking to find out how we can help our clients deliver new services, but also me as an individual consumer, taking Sarah's point there, how can I understand the new services that will come to me, how I can change my behaviors, how will that be affected and interacted by what we're looking to do with opening up energy data?
Super, thanks, Simon. And Helen, from a regulator's perspective, then, how does this all fit together? What's the challenge for government here?
I think there are a number of different challenges, and we've actually called out a few of them already in terms of, the necessary legal policy, contractual access, etc. I think the approach for me feels like one which is very open. So, the introduction of all of the different opportunities from a regulatory perspective, trying to make sure that both the innovation that's open innovation that's required to actually achieve some of the things we're talking about, but also giving guidance and structure to some of the more fundamental things that we might need within license conditions, for example, is something that we are very aware of. So, you know, we're currently consulting around the data best practice and our digital action plans. And that is a very collaborative approach to actually understanding the concerns that the different organisations have and bringing in ideas as to what we could actually do in addition to what we've already done. I do think that we will need to start looking from a regulatory perspective at if there are certain areas of data which are not being opened up, whether it's through an open data or from a licensed public use of the data or a commercial use of the data, but we feel that those are going to be critical, then we will need to be understanding exactly which areas of data we will need to be ensuring through our regulatory positions can actually make a difference. So this is something that we will are looking to consult on as we go through this next year. Part of that is linked also to looking at, because we do have to be careful from a data monopoly perspective. From a, you know, as a government regulator, it's making sure that we do not end up in a position where we have got the wrong sort of model. So that sort of review is something else that the regulator will be looking at. I do think that there will need to be some prioritisation of data. I understand and I agree with the panel's perspective on the conditions and the controls and the initial stance needs to provide for this fuller open model for all data, because it's very hard to go, well, that bit's important and that bit not. But there will come a time when we will need certain investment in certain areas that only the regulator will be able to enforce, and that's the bit that we've got to get under the skin of.
I think that's a fantastic positioning here. It echoes a couple of the comments that have been made in the group chat as well about you know, concern about commercial operators opening up just the minimum viable data that they need to do to meet the regulatory requirements and continue to protect data they deem as commercially sensitive. And you know, there's a lot of vested interest in developing clean energy technologies. I think that there's a particular perspective here that we're trying to address with open energy. As I say, we're trying to address the open energy, the open data component, which is data anyone can use for any purpose for free, which is where a lot of that gaming currently kind of happens. But actually, that's the easier use case. The really tough bit is in what we call the shared data space, where you do have commercially sensitive information. And our starting point there, I think there's two approaches. You know, within government, we have an open by default approach for all government data in the UK. But in industry, that's you know, a lot of organizations run for the hills. So we've got an on-ramp here to say, let's start with open access to discovering what data you have, and then creating the framework where people can share data in a commercial context with IP protection, with all of the processes and controls around the sharing of data, such that it's a closed ecosystem, but it's an open marketplace. And so that the actors are known, and if required, people can charge for the data across that network. But equally, and this is you know, one of the areas we found in open banking, was that because all the banks were forced, and here it's regulated, there it's regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, because they're all forced to share data with each other, it actually shifted the cost to marginal costs. So instead of charging each other every time data was being shared, it moved to a fixed cost model, and effectively there's equal value sharing across that network. So there's reciprocity across the network. And we're looking for those kind of examples of which types of data here just have general utility across a segment of the marketplace, such that we could enable the sharing of information for zero cost. Obviously, it's not zero cost, it's marginal cost. There's always a cost to doing anything, but that we can really open up the access to a broader and broader ecosystem. Again, as we've seen in banking, there's hundreds of different startups and SMEs and enterprises engaged in that ecosystem. So I'm curious, like from say Daniel's your perspective, what would be your data priorities here, and what are the commercial drivers in this and the commercial concerns?
I think from a networks perspective, we've really bought into Ofgem's strategic direction here. The methodology of presumed open has driven what we've done with the data triage proof of concept. We've created a data triage playbook, which, as you say, will categorize all of the different data sets and talk about how you might share certain bits of data with pseudo-anonymization or other techniques to make sure that we can share as much data as possible. And if we can't share data, justify exactly why. As I said before, I think having open data really opens up a lot of opportunities for flexibility on the network. Networks see that as absolutely critical for a modern, dynamic energy system. We need to have flexibility. And when you look at the whole systems, including gas and hydrogen as well, that interoperability of data supports whole system solutions. So that's what we see as the really critical elements.
Great, thanks. There's a question here from the audience as well on challenges around quality and reliability of data across electricity transmission and distribution networks, which is central to these changes. And there's mention of various bits of regulatory instrument. We won't need to unpack them on this call, but RIIO2 and ED2 are the acronyms. How are these going to drive improvements in the data? Let's start with Dan and then come back to Helen on that.
So I think collaboration is key. I think we've already mentioned the industry level task forces. So the Energy Data Task Force originally, now the Energy Digitalization Task Force. There's also the EV Energy Task Force and the Electrification of Heat Task Force. They give us a cross-industry perspective of what data is required and how we might meet those needs. And then centrally within ENA, from a network perspective, we have our Data and Digitalization Steering Group. So we meet every month and we are tackling these issues as they come up. And we're tackling them often through projects. So I've mentioned the National Energy System Map. That has, the proof of concept will be launched in October at our Energy Networks Innovation Conference. And that proof of concept has had to break through all of those barriers that have been mentioned, the regulatory barriers, the policy barriers, the IPR barriers, the legal barriers. And we've tackled each one of those step by step. And it's a huge achievement, never been done before on a data project, to get every single network, gas and electricity, transmission and distribution, all agreeing to the same license conditions, the same conditions on that project. So we are tackling those obstacles and making sure that data will be transferable, operable, and of sufficient quality to answer the questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Sounds like fantastic progress. I think one of the things I'm struck with here, and is echoed in our own work on open energy, is we didn't exist a year ago. And the pace of change is really substantial here. And I think the market sentiment is extremely positive. There's a lot of people leaning in. But I'm still keen to hear about those friction points. Helen, what are we going to do to drive things forward?
Well, this is a really good part of the discussion from my perspective, because, like I say, a year ago, 18 months ago, this was all thought, and there was no real action. But there was a lot of people saying, in order to be able to do this, the quality of that data, or we can't do it because the quality of calling out a particular piece of data, the one mentioned around, electricity transmission, distribution networks. If we were to just focus on those individual things that people's pet projects, then we would not get to the point where we need to get to. So the work that we've done, and it's great to hear from Dan about where the ENO is getting to and have got to, has actually got this on the agenda. That's the first thing. It's there now, we can actually work with it. What that means from a regulatory perspective is that we can now build on it. So the things that we put into the RIIO2 and ED2 license conditions and controls gives us a foundation. What we can then do is go, right, that foundation has caused all sorts of things to happen in the sector. Those things that are happening are moving us forward. They're changing the perspective. They're actually starting the journey. But there are going to be these gaps. So the gaps are going to be specific quality of particular types of data, which I mentioned before. The other gaps are going to be about the actual connectivity. So do we have gaps in the digital infrastructure? So the Energy Digitalisation Task Force work that's due to report by the end of this year will give us an idea of the gaps. So from a regulatory perspective, what I'll be looking at is, right, if we have now opened up the Pandora's box and identified which areas we can do something about, and we've got innovation happening, we've got collaboration happening, we've got understanding of what things might actually need to change, then as a regulator, we can then look at, right, what's next? Which bit do we do next? And consult and make sure that that is appropriate. So it is a journey. I haven't seen anybody come up with the full answer set to everything we're doing. The only way this will work is if we collaborate, and that is as much a regulatory collaboration as it and a government collaboration as it is a sector collaboration.
Thank you, Helen. I couldn't agree more. I think, the one thing that we're certain of is that from this point forward, things are only going to get more complex as more and more data and systems come online and more actors come into the horizon of the energy ecosystem. Simon, would you like to come in on this point as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting discussion then, and especially the fact we're looking at RIIO-2 and ED2, which is the electric network side of it. The place I think that comes into this that Dan mentioned as well is, what about our gas network colleagues as well? Because gas, obviously the fuel that serves 22 million homes for heating and cooking mostly, is kind of faceless to a lot of us as consumers, but they're going through a bit of an interesting challenge right now as part of their energy transition. They fundamentally need to move from methane, which powers the network now, to hydrogen. And what we know is that, and this is a use case that ARPA are quite close to, the data requirements to manage a network for hydrogen are hugely different to the data requirements of managing a gas network. And the gas network is, in some places hundreds of years old, or 100 years old. It's been installed a long time ago, very disaggregated, really uncertain about how different parts connect. So for me, and going back to Sarah's earlier point, on there's no silver bullet and there's multi-vectors here, it feels that looking at different scenarios like this, like how can we help the gas network go through this existential change, if you will, addressing all these data challenges, understanding how they can fundamentally do this transformation, which has to be done in the next 30 years or so, purely data driven. What does that look like, and how can we bring that into the fold as well? So yeah, I think it's just really interesting to look at all these different angles of it and how it's such a complex space. But to your point, Gavin, it's moving at such a pace that we really, as a sector and as industry, need to lean in and to work on it now.
Thanks, Simon. And Sarah, I'll come to you next on, and then back to Helen again. Oh, Helen, do you want to come in briefly just now? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just in answer to that point from Simon, and Ofgem, we're not just considering RIIO-2 and ED2. Yeah, we're not just considering one sector. If you look at all of the activity that we're doing, it's about full flexibility. It's about going from supply, demand, through to consumer with all of those different connections. So the data principles that we're developing in one area will need to get applied in different areas. And so that is definitely on the radar.
Great. And Sarah, so it's all the buildings, it's all the vehicles, it's all the systems. How are we going to get this to join up?
Well, I think the word's been used already, and it's collaboration. And I think there's a big culture issue here for me. I think we've got two big issues with data in the energy industry. One is the one that got referred to in the chat earlier, that we're always told our data isn't very good. It's not very consistent, it's not very reliable. So there's work that needs to be done on that. And actually, interestingly, that's on the distribution side, but it's also on the supply side. And so that's the sort of end consumer data. And that will be helped as a result of the smart meter rollout and the changes that we will see there, and the move to market-wide half-hourly settlement as well. But the other big issue is around that culture piece. We think data is valuable So we want to hold on to it. And we think that giving it away is like giving value away to a competitor. So we need to turn that idea on its head. The world is changing, and we need to change with it. And we need to appreciate that it actually becomes more valuable when you connect it with other data rather than less valuable. So that's where your point, or your point, my point, the point about transport, about buildings, about everything else comes in, because we need to get that mindset change that says this isn't about holding it and locking it up. This is about actually working with others to improve the value of the data and to bring a greater benefit, not only to the country, which we'd all like to see, but also, the people aren't in this market for charitable purposes. Also as a commercial proposition as well, working with others, there can be benefit.
Great, thank you. And Andy, I'll come back to you in a moment, but I just want to reflect on that. One of the principles that we work to at Icebreaker One is to connect, not collect. And really, for me, the value of data increases the more it's connected. One of the experiences I had in helping to set up and run the Open Data Institute was every company we spoke to said that they'd love it if everybody else was open, as long as they didn't have to be. So the idea of reciprocity, of value sharing across networks is absolutely fundamental here. And when we talk about shared data is designed, the architecture here that we're working to is designed to try and unpack that reciprocity question. If all the data is flowing one way, if Sarah, as you said, if all the value is flowing out the door, people are not going to share. There has to be equal value, at least flowing back in the door, in order for companies to see the value of this. Andy, when you look out at the kind of work you're doing, is data quality a big issue just now, or is it still just at the discovery stage? Where are we at on the maturity curve here of data?
I think it depends. It depends where. I think certainly we've come across many cases where data quality is an issue. And I think in part we can address that by having use case mappings and also impact assessments on what would change if we had, if we improved, what could we do? So I think in terms of opening data up and improving data, I think you need to have some sort of impact assessment. It's not only just breaking down the minimum barriers, it's saying, okay, what's the potential impact if we did change this? I think also there's another question in data quality in terms of let's say there is when someone manipulates data, for example, that process is reasonably transparent and you know what happens. All that process, there's a standardization around that process. So people do, with low quality data, when they're joining data sets, people will manipulate them or aggregate them, but that needs to be a relatively transparent or standardized process. Otherwise, you get different data sources from different vendors, but you don't really know how they all join together, and you don't really know the uncertainty of the raw data. So I think that's another issue on top of what we've already been saying.
Thank you. Now, and I think on this data quality piece and publishing of open data, there's another anecdote in working with Francis Maud when he was in the Cabinet Office, is he was pushing very hard for different government departments to open up their data. And the typical response was, it's not good enough quality yet. And he had a fantastic line, well, if you make it open, if you publish it, you'll find it gets better quality quite quickly. But that requires air cover. If you look, it requires senior management and senior leadership cover for the people who are on the front line of doing this work to say, look, if you publish this, we will invest in helping you to improve it. And so that's a really critical component. And as Dan mentioned, that leadership from the ENA is critical to helping to move forward here. So as Sarah said, this is a culture change challenge. The technology, we've got plenty of technology out there. We're not short of technology solutions to address these questions. There's a question here from the audience of, do we need to address the liability and cost of curating good fit for purpose data? If I come back to maybe Dan on that question.
Yeah, I mean, liability is certainly a critical thing to consider. We, at the risk of repeating myself, we're kind of we're trying to crash through all of these barriers and overcome these obstacles through the projects we're doing. So we have the data triage proof of concept, which is now live, and it's the energy data request tool. To Andy's point around transparency, there is a playbook that sits alongside that, which describes exactly how any data request will be serviced, how it will be assessed, and then how that data request will ultimately be met. So we're trying to be visible and transparent at every step here. We recognise the need for data, and we will be as transparent as we can be as we service those requests. Yeah, I think it's a really important area. It's an area with a lot of challenges, and through these projects, we're getting buy-in from senior government, of senior CEOs and C-suite from the networks. We're demonstrating the value through these projects, and that means we can go on to the next project with a live use case of why it's useful, why it's helpful, and how it helps not only networks but other industry players as well.
Great, thanks, Dan. So we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to ask all of our panelists in a moment to say, what's the one big thing that we need to do in order to drive this behavior change, this culture change, so that we can hit our Paris Agreement targets? This is a net zero imperative. There's lots of things happening in parallel, as the panel have highlighted. We're modernizing our energy infrastructure. We're shifting the modes of production and supply and demand really radically. And this would be happening even if we didn't have the climate agenda to deal with. But the climate agenda is a massive forcing function here where we have to accelerate change. So I wonder, as we go round the panel here and say, what's the one big intervention that you think would really make a systemic difference? I'd also like to reflect a little bit as we go round on what's the cost of this? What scale of investment should businesses be making in this? Simon's highlighted that ARPA sees sustainability at the absolute core of their strategy. It's not a thing that's happening at the side. I think the shift here that I've been seeing across companies is that the kind of ESG reporting and net zero agenda is shifting from a category that sits at the side of the boardroom to one that sits at the heart of its strategy. So let's maybe go around. Simon, if I can start with you then, what's the scale of investment? What's the one big intervention here?
Absolutely, and you kind of took some of what I was going to share there, that it's about making this no longer a fringe discussion, something that is really embedded into the culture of an organization and into our country. And this year in particular, I think is great for that. So COP26, of course, is happening, really big year for climate change in general. And coupling that with a lot of policy and a lot of discussion around the energy system modernization over the last year or so, 10-point plan, etc., bringing all that together and socializing it in a way using the right regulatory levers to enforce this where it needs to be enforced, but also more gently approach it in other areas, for me is kind of what we need to be doing. So kind of summarizing that, it's all organizations involved in the system, particularly corporates like ourselves, taking responsibility for this, that they need to be actively involved in the journey and pushing that into what they do, I think is going to take a really good step forward. There are many more, but that's the one I'm going to highlight here.
Right. Thanks, Simon. Andy?
I think it's a mix, actually. I can't say one. I think there needs to. I think some corporations are improving. At the end of the day, they still need to make a profit. Otherwise, they can't exist. I think part of it was going to come through regulation on reporting. And I think that applies. So I think some bigger businesses perhaps are able to drive some of the culture change. I think some smaller firms will struggle, and plus they will struggle on knowing what to do. So I think some form of regulation, but also enabling businesses to see the benefits and making those visible.
Great. Thanks, Andy. And Daniel?
I think we've spoken a bit about culture change already. I think there are some other things. I've mentioned standardization. I think that's absolutely critical. One other thing, we've talked a little bit about data flows and how we get information coming into the industry as well. One thing we're trying to do is digitalize the connections process. And by doing that, we are getting machine-to-machine ready data coming into the network for every connection, starting out with EVs and heat pumps at the domestic level, and then moving on to other use cases after that. And that's one way in which we can develop a service which will make it faster for customers, easier for installers, and provide networks with more data. So I'd say it's those kind of initiatives that we can build and start to change culture on, actually doing something rather than sort of hypothesizing about what can be done. I really think that action on the ground, where we're starting to share data and we're showing that it's safe, it's reliable, it works, and these are the values that we can get.
And what's the scale of investment here? Are we talking about just in terms of data strategy? Is this investment in tens or hundreds of, or?
Well, in terms of E&A, we're a not-for-profit trade association, so everything we do is at marginal cost, as you were saying earlier on. So, for us, we can build some pretty useful tools fairly quickly with a whole systems approach, so all networks involved, and turn those around and get them working and get them live pretty quickly. So it's not a huge scale investment for us. If we were talking about large scale investment, I think where we really would see some benefit is in a whole systems demonstration project, a very large scale demonstration project that included transport, water, gas and electricity, obviously, distributed generation. That kind of large scale investment would be really, really critical in showing what we can do at a whole systems level in reality.
Great, thanks. And Helen?
Yeah, I think it's not one thing. It's probably it's three, and I think we've picked up on it. I think Dan's point just now about some real things on the ground actually start to make things happen, and that's obviously where the open energy piece comes in, as well as all the work that E&O are doing and a number of others. So there's some real things. There's a focus on, for me, on that organisational understanding. There is a responsibility for all of us to make sure that this is on the agenda and understood as why this is so critical to have at a board level discussion across all companies, big or small, so that people understand this is not just about developing competition, this is about actually achieving those targets, and for us as individuals to actually achieve that sort of passion around making sure we are moving towards net zero. There is obviously a regulatory perspective which needs to be at the right appropriate level to move things along, but without being over controlling. And then the final bit for me is about this investment in data strategy, or the investment required. Our digital action plans will hopefully show what level of investment people are putting into an organisation is putting into their whole digitalisation and data activities. And if that activity from a data perspective will be happening, even without the regulator going, actually, you need to be doing this, because if an organisation isn't investing in data, then they're going to get left behind, being really blunt about it. But if that is happening, then the opening up of that data should be a less of a bigger challenge. The big problem is actually the investment in the sourcing of quality data from a set of platforms which may not actually provide the right level of data. So we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
And I'll close
Brilliant.
there.
Thanks, Helen. And Sarah, if you can briefly, we're nearly
Yes.
at time here.
Yeah, no, I know you like to finish on time, Gavin. So in 30 seconds, I think customers, we need to get customers on board, and we need to get customers into a position where they're not afraid of sharing their data, because ultimately that will lead to a better result at the end of the day. The culture piece, I think I've talked about at great length. And from the sort of investment piece, I think we need to get companies to a place where they understand and where their investors leave them in no doubt that there is more risk in not changing than in changing. And I'd leave it there.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much. Well, just to finish us off for today, so firstly, thank you to all the panel. Been a fantastic conversation. The archive of this will be available on the website by tomorrow. I think just to finish up, Icebreaker One here is trying to make data work harder to deliver net zero and empower decision makers to mandate, measure, and act upon the data flows that will enable us to hit net zero. The process that we're in at the moment with the open energy development is we're in beta right now with organizations like ARPA and the National Grid and so on. And we're very keen to get people to engage. As Sarah was saying, this has got to be a collaborative effort. And we are going to be, over the course of Q3 this year, expanding the number of use cases and engagement with industry as we move forward. So we're very keen to hear from everybody here. And if you know people working in the energy sector who'd like to get involved, please get in touch. And just one final call, if you are working on energy data visualization, we have a showcase at the moment on the website with awards of up to £7,000. So please get people to apply for that, and we will put them into the process. So thank you very much to everyone today. We are working on a hugely ambitious project here, which we believe will be part of our national data infrastructure. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their time and contributions today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone.